If a woman's shocking accusation is carrying a script she unfolds, she leaves them with words. It's the perfect Saturday afternoon in Greenville, South Carolina, the type of day where sunlight dances through the trees and plays playful patterns on the sidewalk. Darren Love estimated these afternoons. He was passionate about revealing the story behind the architecture and landscape of his city. Getting a camera and a small notebook on his shoulder, he hiked down the quiet streets and sometimes continued his breaks to admire the intricate details of the Victorian veranda and the unique masonry of the old church. History wasn't the only hobby of Darren's. It was his way of connecting with his community, documenting its appeal and sharing it on his blog. Over time, he deserved a modest supporter of local readers who appreciated his discoveries and photos. He often received emails from seniors who were grateful for maintaining the city's heritage in this personal way. However, this afternoon felt a little different. As Darren took a walk along Sycamore Avenue, he noticed a woman staring at him behind the top curtain. Her eyes carried inside him as if she wanted to solve the puzzle. He offered a polite wave, but she did not answer. Instead, he grabbed the curtains, leaving behind a continuous sense of symptoms. He wiped it off and continued taking pictures of the old oak standing proudly in the middle of the courtyard. Linda walked through the living room in her house, her phone stuck tightly into her hands. "There's a guy going up and down the street," she hissed at the recipient. "He introduced me near the house and took some photos. I'm sure he's looking for a neighborhood. You have to send someone." The operator on the other end tried to calm her down, but Linda didn't hear it. For her, Darren's actions were questionable, and he planned that she had decided to stop what she had imagined. Unbeknownst to the phone, Darren proceeded down the street and praised the painting house of handicrafts. He crouched down a bit to get the best angle for his photo, and it didn't know that the tension brewed behind closed doors was rising. The gentle charm of Sycamore Avenue was just before it broke. But before Darren took the next photo, the sound of the sirens echoed through the streets, and what happened next was really dry. The sirens grew larger and ruined the calm atmosphere of the neighborhood. Darren was straightened in confusion as two police cruisers surrounded the corner and attacked just a few meters away. The flashing red and blue light reflected from nearby houses, swirling eerie glows over the untouched grass. The neighbor looked out the windows and doors, and their curiosity awakened by a sudden excitement. Darren's confusion changed the discomfort as the two officers left the car and approached him. "Hello, sir," said one of his healthy experts, but defended. "Do we have words with you?" "Of course." Darren's voice is stable, but he doesn't know what happened. He placed his camera and notebook on the sidewalk and briefly raised his hands to show that there was nothing to hide. "Are you having a problem?" The official threw his partner before speaking. "We got a call about people who are acting suspiciously in the area. Do you live around here?" Darren's bruise frowned. "Suspicious? I just take photos for my blog. I document the historic homes and architecture in the area." He pointed out his camera and notebooks as evidence of his claims. Before the officer could answer, Linda appeared on her veranda. Her face was full of anger. "This is him," he called her, and showed her trembling fingers in Darren's direction. "I saw him go back and forth and look at the house and take photos. He's planning something, I know." Darren's jaw fell. "Are you planning something?" "Madame, I'll take a picture. That's all." However, Linda did not retreat. "Don't be fooled by him." She insisted that her voice had risen in all words. "I've seen it before. They can be around and pretend to be harmless, then they break everywhere." The officers exchanged their appearances, and their attitude was tense. "Sir," one of them said, then returned to Darren. Darren then pulled out his wallet and handed him his driver's license. When officers looked into it, more neighbors emerged from their homes and formed small quantities on the sidewalk. Among them was Donovan, an older woman with a friendly face who lived in several homes in the episode. "What's going on here?" she cried out as her voice cut off the crowd's mutter. She quickly recognized Darren. "Yeah, that's Darren. He blogs about Greenville's story. I saw his contributions. He's harmless." Linda turned to her expression of a mixture of stimulation and distrust. "Donovan. Harmony? You can't know that. Just because he's blogging doesn't mean he's doing nothing." Donovan frowned and he approached Darren. "I know for sure. He's been documenting our neighborhood for months and I've even helped him with his research. They make big mistakes." Feeling the tensions rising, the officer raised his hands to calm everyone down. "Let us all take a step back," one of you said. "We're trying to find out what's going on here." However, as more and more neighbors began to apply, the situation became out of control, revealing much more than any other expectation. The tension in the air was evident when the amount was large. Neighbors whisper to each other. Their voices are a mixture of curiosity and concern. Some spoke with Linda that her vigilance was justified, while others nodded to Donovan and defended Darren's intentions. The atmosphere felt like a powder barrel exploded with a slight spark. "Look, officer," Darren said calmly. I was in his tone, but I've lived in Greenville for years. I'm keen to document the history of this city, that's all. He kept the camera again. "We welcome to check the photos. It's nothing more than a home and a view." Officers showed Darren handed the cameras without hesitation. The officer flipped through photos of old houses, ancient streetlights, and weathered mailboxes. It was clear that nothing was stressful. However, Linda did not retreat. "Of course he wouldn't take any photos of any suspicious things," she snapped. "He's smart enough to cover his tracks." "That's enough, Linda," Mrs. Donovan thrusts her into the voice. "They've always been quick to judge people, but that's too far. Darren did nothing wrong." Linda fucked her arm and her chin was pulled. "And if I'm right? Thank you, everyone." The crowd's tweets got bigger and more neighbors in. Young couple Mia and Jared performed. "I read Darren's blog," Mia said. "Exactly," Jared added. "Linda, you don't recognize them, so you can't accept the worst of the situation than someone else." Linda's face turned red, but she was standing on the floor. "It's not about recognizing him. It's about being careful. I can't be too careful these days." The crowd is now completely divided. Meanwhile, those who defended Darren were citing his contributions to the community and his apparent innocence. Meanwhile, people like Linda, who thought his actions were suspicious and worried. The officer was in the middle of the shower tower and tried to maintain order. "Everyone, please calm down," his voice, but diplomatic. "We are just here to ensure everyone is safe. No one is arrested. Collect information only." Darren shook her head, her patience diagonally fading. "I'm careful," he said, speaking to the crowd. "But we're not careful what's going on. It's completely different." His words, along with implications, hang heavy into the air. The crowd silenced, looking down, others swapping restless looks. Donovan returned near Darren and placed a soothing hand on his arm. "That's not right," she said quietly, but loud enough for others to hear. "We're better than that, isn't it?" And when the situation seemed unescalable, someone decided to speak in the crowd, and everything they said changed. The voice broke the amount of restless silence. "It feels wrong, and we all know that." The spokesman was Tom, a retired principal, known for his gentle appearance and his sense of fairness. He advised that his current people had shown caution. "I looked around Darren. I read his blog. The only thing he owes is to be more grateful to our community than most of us." Linda chuckled, her arms still intertwined. "So, can we just ignore suspicious behavior? This is how people have been injured." Tom turned to Linda, and his sound was tight but firm. Who is the power, Linda? Darren does nothing illegal or harmful. He only works and takes photos. What poses a threat to it? The weight of Tom's words settled over the crowd. Slowly, the others began to nod. Even the first person to deal with Linda began to rethink. The truth was clearly seen. Darren was unfairly targeted, and this was not good for anyone. However, Linda was not ready to retreat. You're easy to tell, Tom. You didn't see him because I craped and acted like he had the place. Raw around? Darren threw in, his voice incredible. I walked on the sidewalk and took photos of the house. It's not Kire. It's a public place. The crowd muttered again, but this time the sound changed. Discomfort can no longer be addressed to Darren. I was aiming for Linda. Once reinforced by fear and doubt, her words now sound hollow in the face of logic and fairness. Then Donovan spoke again with undeniable authority. Linda, that's not something to be careful about. This is to jump to the conclusion, as Darren doesn't fit the idea of who belongs here. And that's not okay. Linda's face was washed with a deep red, and for the first time she looked like a loss of words. The crowd looked at her and waited for her answer, but no one came. One of the policemen cleaned up and broke the tension. We have checked the situation, but there is no evidence of any misconduct here. Darren, you can go freely. Darren let out a breath, not realizing he had captured him. Thank you, he said, and his voice was stable, but tired. He turned to the crowd. And I'm grateful to those who have entered me. That means more than you know. The crowd lasted as Darren began. The story hummed quietly, but the sound changed. People not only discussed what happened, but also looked back. There was a light on the unpleasant thing about the incident, but it had to be addressed. But before Darren went, the final voice of the crowd stopped at his traces, turning the moment into something no one would forget. When Darren left, a gentle voice was kept on track as he was called out by the crowd. It was Mia who had previously defended him. Darren, wait, she said. I think we all owe you an apology before you go. Her words were hanging in the air, and no one moved for a moment. Linda then hesitated to everyone's surprise before he took a step closer. Her face was still red, but now it was a mixture of embarrassment and regret. She's right, Linda raised, and her voice trembled. I apologize to you. The crowd silenced and turned to Linda. I jumped to the conclusion, she admitted. Her words were slow and intentional. My fear clouded my judgment, and I'm sorry. I was wrong. Darren looked at her, his expression incomprehensible. He didn't answer right away, letting her words fly around. Finally, he nodded. Thank you, he said, his tone measured. But it's not just me. It's about how easy it is to consider someone a threat simply because they're not familiar. Linda's shoulders sagged. Her eyes fell to the ground. I'll make it better, she muttered. I have to do it. At that moment, Donovan played and addressed the entire crowd. We all have to make it better, she said, her voice unshakable. This isn't just about people and incidents. It's about how we deal with how we see each other. We can't decide or bias our actions. Tom nodded in agreement. We have to make this a turning point, he said. Don't let them go in that moment without learning anything from it. Volume tweeted, ideas began to form plans to hold regular community meetings to not only relieve concerns, but also promote understanding and unity. Darren was still upset, but agreed to be part of the first meeting, sharing his perspective and helping others recognize the value of empathy and openness. Linda also promised to participate quietly. It wasn't that much, but it was the beginning. When the crowd was distributed, Darren left a mixture of faint feelings of relief, frustration, and hope. What began as a walk around the neighborhood turned into a somewhat larger wake-up call for the entire community. This story reminds us how important it is to look beyond our assumptions and choose to understand fear. If you have ever felt that the stitching is judged unfair or that someone else would observe being treated this way, ask for this behavior. You stand up, speak up, try to change the needs of your community. Don't forget stories like this. Subscribe more and join in the conversation. Together we can do something.